kick off the discussion?
Am I doing that or are you doing that?
Oh, yeah, you can throw out the question. And throw out the,
Let me frame it a little bit first. So we have, this session was kind of selected the title and topic by the Bone Sarcoma Alliance. And for the kind of panel discussion, including Dr. Weiss and Dr. Grohar, and Christine is also going to put on her hat as patient advocate as well. They wanted us to kind of focus this discussion a bit on multidisciplinary teams and tumor boards. And are these multidisciplinary teams really focused on the patient, or are they focused more on the disease? And kind of embedded in that also, they wanted us to talk a little bit about precision oncology and about, where are we at with the tools that are available to you right now to be able to be really very individual patient directed and selecting therapy for the individual patient. So maybe we'll begin by maybe hearing from you, Dr. Weiss and Dr. Grohar, about the multidisciplinary team and kind of what is their kind of focus, how do they work, and maybe share a little bit about how that works in your institution for care of patients. So.
I want you to, okay. It's probably not vastly different than this year, but we have a adult tumor board and a pediatric tumor board. In both of them, the members are the musculoskeletal oncology surgeons, me and my partners, medical oncologists, adult or pediatric, radiation oncologists, pathology, radiology. And the typical flow of events will be a case is presented, usually by me. Darlene is a 29-year-old lady with painful lump in her tibia. And she came in, and that's all I'll say. Then they'll go through the radiology, show her the x-rays and the scans, CT scans if they're there. And the radiologist will give their differential, and we will say if we agree or disagree with that. Okay, then what happened? Well, based on the scans, we sent Darlene for a biopsy. This shows a myxoid liposarcoma, and let's make it a chondrosarcoma, because this is a bone tumor meeting, right? So it's a low-grade chondroid neoplasm. So what are the next steps? And okay, and someone will say, okay, has she been staged? We did staging studies for long-term fine. Okay, what's your plan for surgery? Well, I thought we would do, since even though the biopsy said it's low-grade, cartilage tumors are very, very notorious for being heterogeneous. We can't assume that. Looks pretty bad on the x-ray, so I'm going to do a resection. And my partners will be, and my both in surgery and from other domains, will be able to say whether they think that's dumb or stupid or smart. And then based on that discussion, we'll say, okay, well, Darlene's coming in next Tuesday to see me in clinic, and this is what we're going to do. And that's, or it will be a case of, we took Darlene to the operating room. This is what we thought we were dealing with. We did a surgery. Here's the x-ray. Let's go over the pathology. How smart were we? Were we right? How were my margins? If we used chemotherapy, if it was an osteosarcoma or response to chemotherapy is very important. How effective was that? Did the kid get an A on the test, right? Are we above that 90%? And we just learned in Ewing at CTOS that the number got to be 100%. How well did the chemo do? If the patient had neoadjuvant radiation, how did that do? So it's very much a working conference. It's academic to the extent that we want to bring data and evidence-based solutions to each patient, right? Oh, Darlene has myxoid liposarcoma. Well, she needs to get preoperative radiation. She had a dedifferentiated liposarcoma. She should get radiation and pembrolizumab because of the SARC-32 study, which demonstrated that that combination was a positive trial, and that's the way that nut ought to be cracked. And you'll get your hands on her 4 weeks after the radiation, then you can do your surgery. So very much a working conference and a evidence-based conference that brings everybody's expertise to the table. And so to get to the original question, is it patient-centered or disease-centered? I'm gonna cheat and say it's both.
So you take into account particular nuances of the patient in the context of the diagnosis? Would that be fair to say?
I think that would be fair to say, perhaps that gets more into, what I'm going to do, surgically. It might be a case of, yeah, this patient's gonna be terrible with amputation. Right, and we've talked about this, and they don't want it, think it's a bad idea, so we're gonna do this. Even though these are the complications, we know that going into it, we all got open eyes. She's diabetic, she's got a terrible heart, high risk of infection, we're doing it anyway, and this is why. So, I don't know, I hope you don't think I'm copping out, Denise, but I hope that the answer is yes to both.
How do you decide who you're talking about that week? You can't talk about all of them every.
Just, who did we take to surgery?
So who's going to surgery?
No, who went, and we did the surgery, the pathology's been done, what do we see? Were the margins positive, and I say some bad words, and I know I gotta take that patient back and chase some more. So it's typically, more typically than what I described, my apologies, is that, okay, we just did the surgery, here's the path, what do we do now?
Kurt, it's not all surgery. Sometimes it's just the percutaneous needle biopsy.
Yeah.
Pre-surgery that will be discussed at tumor board.
And just a reminder, the acoustics aren't great in this room, so I'm just gonna ask that everyone remember to speak loudly enough so that everyone can hear.
Yeah, it's the same at Michigan. I would argue it's probably the same at most places. I've been at a few places, so it's, pretty similar. Patients come to tumor board at inflection points, at decision making, relapse, and then certainly at diagnosis. I guess the only other thing I'll add is at Michigan, one of the things that we have, which is really nice, is we have a really strong medical oncology sarcoma service with Rashmi too. And so for our patients, if in pediatrics we see something that's just a little bit not so sure about that, then one of the nice things that we have is we can go to the adult medical oncology tumor board and re-review it to get additional insight. And I've only been there about a year, but my understanding is that's quite common, particularly relapse, because Rashmi's got a bunch of studies and that sort of thing. And then, maybe the only other thing I'll mention is one of the things we talked a lot about is access. And, at smaller centers that don't have a sarcoma surgeon or don't have radiation oncology or, don't have all that expertise in the room that you get at a place like Pittsburgh or Michigan. I think that's a real challenge, and I'm not sure exactly what the solution is for that. I mean, I heard earlier someone said, it's hard to travel when you have cancer. I get that. But at the same time, you need somebody who's done a lot of these surgeries in patients with osteosarcoma to weigh in on surgery frequently, I would argue. So I'm not sure what the solution is. In pediatrics, there's a national tumor board that's run where they allow people to present cases. I'm not sure how we do that because they're licensed by, we're all licensed by state. So I'm not sure exactly how that goes, but we do it. And so that's another option. But then to your question, I do actually think that it probably favors for the case and not for the patient in that equation. And that's probably not the right way to do it. I feel like it's all about the biology and the genetics and the resection and the radiation and the fields and maybe, I don't know, what would, I'll turn around to you. What would you think, or, what would you think we should be talking about in those meetings that maybe we're not always?
I mean, so I might be hosting osteosarcoma virtual tumor board, which I kind of participated. I sent
Oh,
those
okay,
stuff
great.
and see what happens. And I know Ewing has one, and I know Chondro is starting also a virtual tumor board. And I know for each sat in some of those, and I actually feel like those do take into account the specific patient a lot. I mean, I think some of the conversations are around where that patient is located, how easy would it be for them to enroll in some of the
Great.
trials that have been suggested. So I actually do feel like that particular patient circumstances and not just like the medical, like their 360 circumstances, I think are discussed and taken into account in those meetings. But this might, so I think something I think at least that we have an understanding that kind of lends itself to personalized medicine right now is things like the genetic sequencing, for example. So, we ask when people come to tumor board, like to share any of their test results. And not everyone has that. It'd be interesting, actually, since we have global representation around the table, to kind of understand how many patients actually have access to that, how important that is to decision-making in these tumor boards. Because I know we ask, and I mean, and I know the diseases are different, and I can only really speak for osteo, but I mean, I know that there's still no direct line, right, between what your limitations might be to having any sort of agent or drug, right, that can actually effectively target that. But, it's still somewhat helpful to have, perhaps, I don't know, to understand underlying mechanisms, so.
I think it definitely is, right? So at Michigan, we have an awesome panel, it's called My Uncle Seek. It's a really strong genomics place. I think I've said that a couple times. And there's things about a tumor, you can look at it and maybe it's not published that it's bad, but I have a patient right now and that kind of looks like it's chromoplexy and it also has a 1Q gain and that's not really a validated gain, but it's information. And I think it's important so if this kid has a borderline margin or something and you're trying to make a decision for more or less therapy for that kid, I mean, I'll push for more based on the kid's genetics, right? Whether that's right or not, that's information. And I don't know that, I think everybody should have that information. I don't know, Kurt, what you think about that.
No, hey, nobody's doing that to,
Yeah.
you guys are teaching the rest of the world how to use that in Michigan. Nobody does it as well or as much. We do have, I think it's the same panel. It's not, we don't use it ubiquitously on every patient. We kind of pick our spots.
Yeah.
When things are weird, this with pathologists, the stains, the mitotic activity, the appearance, something just ain't right. And a patient like that will get sequenced to see if we can, do what you just said, Patrick, bring in more information. Because when things are weird, you need more information to try and make an intelligent-ish decision.
Okay.
We're getting back to the question of how much do you bring in the patient? There are really two types of tumor board. One is that initial diagnosis where you have not discussed yet with the patient what their diagnosis is, what their options are, and what they want to do. And in that tumor board, you can't bring the patient because you know nothing about their desires and their needs. And then there's that second tumor board, post-resection or post-recurrence, where you already have had that opportunity to meet with the family, meet with the patient, and make those inclusions.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point about it, and one I was going to ask you about. If we think that care for bone sarcoma is required, or is the best practice is to have a multidisciplinary team. If you're in a smaller center or in a part of the world where they don't have access to this, how do we begin to address that and deal with that? Because it sounds like that this is really a critical component in order to getting optimal care, and yet I'm quite sure this is not a standard that's available.
Well, not optimal. One of my colleagues used to go to Nigeria for a month every year. And since COVID and since the political situation is unstable, but he still gets x-rays and clinical history sent to him. And when it's a sarcoma case or a potential sarcoma case, I'll get the email to at least offer some more knowledgeable take on the x-rays and the history and what the options might be. Obviously, in Nigeria, $30,000 endoprosthesis is not an option, and we recognize that. So what are the other surgical options that might exist? So the internet provides some opportunity for rural, low-income areas to get some help.
Does MIB, do they just have, are they just US based or are they global? In case-
Global, the tumor board's global
Okay.
since it's virtual. But for genomics, so sequencing, so if you're not an institution where they do have in-house panel, in-house testing, and you will automatically, get that. If you're at a smaller community hospital or just hospital doesn't have that, and then it's expensive to then actually pay for that. Like, it's kind of, what are the options? And I'm also just curious to hear from other patient representatives, and well, how do you, because that is important information to have, and it would be good to have, and not just for the patient, but also just to inform, research. So,
We don't have it in Ireland, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a thing that's done there, so if you do want to, you'll need to send it off and pay for it yourself, you can do it for 5 grand.
Mhm.
I know over to, there's one in the UK, and I think it's one of the banks that they would work with. But even if it was sequence, they don't really do anything with it, because they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah.
Do this with her, so it's very pointless for us right now. We will be hopeful that we change that.
No, the US is full of larger sequencing companies, financial aid for it. And they'll give the reports to the team pathologists.
And so maybe for Europe, this is not osteosarcoma specific, but I recently attended a meeting on the issue of testing. And it's very diverse, depending on the healthcare system. So some of the systems can pay for genomic testing, some don't. So we have some smart experts who find a way to do that, but it's not something that is common. And also, I think that the kind of testing, the kind of panel, there are a lot of open questions also within the expert community. So it's a bit of a tricky one also to apply from the patient side for testing when it's not clear what kind of testing should be done. So there are a lot of open questions to be asked.
Don't think for a second that you're the only person it's not clear to. I mean, Patrick knows more about this stuff than anybody, and I think even he would agree that we're still figuring this out as we go along, right?
It was kind of reassuring to hear that the expert community is also not clear on what exactly needs to be done, so.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a risk factor, one QT, it's probably real. I have that patient with it. Do I give more therapy?
yeah, does that change
Does it
clinical?
change the outcome?
Yeah.
I give the kid more therapy, I can guarantee he gets more toxicity, but is that the right move?
Mhm.
I don't
I don't know,
don't
would you be more
actually know.
aggressive in the treatment plan?
I probably would,
Yeah.
but, obviously it's a discussion, just like, you were talking about earlier, Kurt, like about, you educate the patient and tell them what you think, but in general, then I agree with you, like if I say, I think we should do this, then they're probably gonna agree, but I don't know. Again, I think in many ways, it's a call to arms, like the technology exists. We do have enough patients. We just need to be more organized. And there's even people that'll pay for the sequencing. So we just need to figure that out. In the US, I think it should be easy. And now the MCI program and the NCI, everyone's in viewings is getting sequenced, or they should. If they don't, they just started filling out forms. So was it SARCOMA last year that they had a great session on?
So, yeah, or it might have been CTOS, yeah.
Or maybe CTOS, I wasn't sure which
Yeah.
one. And we had a webinar too, where, from our understanding within the field, it's really up for debate on whether or not it's not. With some physicians are, they say, well, we don't have anything to treat them with anyhow, so why test? But our view is that we don't know until you test. There are.
We can stop. We need to learn like
Right.
this.
And is that where advocates can be helpful, right? And,
Yeah.
because maybe they're being told, don't get it done,
Yeah.
right? And so now
Absolutely.
patients are caught between their treating centers saying one thing and then, you need to give rationale and tools to be able to have these discussions. So that the testing is done, because otherwise you get caught in a circle,
Yeah.
right?
You don't know.
And you don't know, and then you can't, but advise to have it done, and what do you do with it when you get it, but you won't know it until you begin to amass enough data, correct, to say, well, what does some of this mean and how do we utilize it? How far off do you think we are? Like, is this, like,
I mean, I think, it needs to be with intention, we biobank for a long time, and I'll give an example. This gene called MYC that's amplified in osteosarcoma that people are interested in, the COG. We went to the biobank for the last 20 years and just tried to ask the question, does it matter? And we needed like 140 samples, 20 years of biobanking. To answer the question, and at the end of the day, by the time we got done with, cutting edge technology at top center, there were 65 cases, so we aren't able to answer the question anyway. So, and that's like a simple question that everybody believes, and that should be something we should be able to ask and answer in 1 year time. Like, really, if we did it intentionally with the right groups, like we should be able to ask and answer that question. So, yeah, we're not going to make progress if we're not more aggressive about it. In my opinion.
So I have a question, I'll throw a question out there about like, actually what is precision oncology? Because I feel like there are different degrees of it. So with like recent technology, we much better understand the disease, right? We used to think osteosarcoma was one disease, and now we much better understand that it's many subtypes. And we probably still just, I would say still have a lot further to go on better understanding that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Spatial, all that stuff that you showed. And then we even have like, same patient, different parts of the tumor look different, or like one nodule looks different from the other nodule, right? So just very kind of difficult, right, to treat. And so I feel like what you showed, your example is like we're honing in on subtypes, right? And so we can put people into buckets and say, okay, you're MYC amplified, and so maybe we'll put you on this, treatment plan. But then beyond that, I feel like the technology is enabling further, like really one-to-one personalization, right? So like autologous immunotherapy is an example of that, where you're actually like using my cells kind of come up with a vaccine, do a personalized vaccine. Or there are things like digital twins, someone just mentioned in the other session, or personalized PDFs, 3D personalized, 3D organized, which are cheaper and faster. Functional drug testing. So regardless of my genomics or whatever, like you can just put my cells in the dish and see what. So that, to me, that's like really personalized medicine, where it's me, because I feel like there's probably still in this universe, still don't really understand all the different mechanisms and how they're tied together, right? Where if you knock down one pathway, maybe there's like another pathway, right? That just hears that. So super complex, and are we going to be able to solve that just by subtypes? And so when we get down to real personalized medicine, that's really like one-to-one. I want to get your thoughts on like how far away are we from that, and thoughts on that versus like just the subtype approach.
So it's a timely question, because we're trying to get up and running a drug sensitivity testing panel at my shop, but it can be used by anybody. Look to try to answer precisely that question. Like, okay, these cases are the hardest of the hard. We both sit on these national and international tumor boards, kids on 8th line therapy, and they failed everything. What are we going to do? And it feels like we're just spinning the wheel and picking something that we try to convince ourselves is cogent. It would be probably, in my opinion, much more intelligent to take a little chunk of your highly resistant tumor and put it on a drug sensitivity testing panel. And if we're going to guess, we may as well guess intelligently. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that Patrick and I shouldn't keep trying to understand the biology of metastatic disease and drug resistant and all that stuff. But I think we can walk and chew gum. We can keep our labs going, and we can try to give that kid what that kid needs in the moment. So I do think that there's a big potential for drug sensitivity testing, particularly in settings of refractory disease, but we're not sure what to do. Like every kid, like we said in the talk, every kid with osteosarcoma over the entire world is pretty much getting the same thing. That's not the problem. The problem is, well, what happens, metastasis, or, the kid fails. We say the kid failed chemo, but really the chemo failed the kid, didn't it? And what do we do in those instances? And I think that's where research needs to help us, and drug sensitivity testing can help us.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I will say, oftentimes it's the rare tumor that benefits a lot from the sequencing, right? So like we'll have a kid with this kind of weird tumor and it's not really, and nobody knows the name, so we're Googling it during tumor board and then we're just like, just have an NTRK fusion. And then it does, and then the kid gets the NTRK inhibitor and does great. So I feel like the pile of tumors that have an inhibitor that works is growing slowly, unfortunately, but it's growing, and NTRK fusions are probably the best example of that. I think in sarcoma, a lot of these surface proteins and ADCs are promising, like, you know, targeted molecules to a cell surface protein, particularly osteo. I think that people are really excited about that. But I think that's gonna put access on steroids, right? Like that's gonna amp up the issue of access, right? Because we can't get a drug for a disease if we promise it to everybody, so much less like a couple of patients every 2 or 3 years can we have drugs. So I definitely think that's a role for advocates to help with that, but I love this idea of the screening panel. I mean, look, in 2025, we still do that when someone's got a bacterial infection, right? Like they get plated with all the antibiotics on a plate, and sensitive to this and resistant to that, and that's how they make treatment decisions. So why can't we do that?
Yeah.
So I'm cognizant that the time is kind of getting away on us. I want to make sure that we open up and give everyone in the room opportunity to ask their questions and, you know, express their thoughts. What burning questions remain? I don't think we've answered them all.
Kind of playing off of that and thinking the first one is, and I definitely think it obviously, as you talked to about too, like it is very patient dependent. But then how do you also balance that with like finding things that are working and like meeting the numbers to prove that they're working? Oh,
Good question.
yeah.
I think it's, when numbers are very small, maybe what we want to do is not so much identify a solution at the end of the line, but like a process. What process did we go through to get the answer? And was that process, whether it's sequencing or drug sensitivity testing or both, or picking names out of a hat, like what process is yielding good results? I think that's something that can be asked and answered.
I think Sylvia's talk today spoke to that really, really
Yeah.
elegantly. I mean, I thought it was just a really awesome capturing of challenges for sarcoma patients with even rare ones like Ewing's and osteo, and I think that was a really awesome session.
Any thoughts, questions? Yes, Kyla, do you want to speak at all to the Cure ID program and capturing, you know, as people kind of, as you say, sometimes you spin the wheel and you pick a drug and then maybe it works or it doesn't work. And where do we begin to capture it's in your experience, in your, you know, in your clinic, but then how do we begin to share that so that we can kind of, you know, amass some data that, and maybe identify, well, you know, this person here in this part of the world used it and it worked, and this person used it and it worked, and suddenly begin to maybe pick up a pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. So, PRD program is a collaboration between the FDA and OA, and it's a global screening platform available to everybody. And the idea is it's kind of a registry to capture treatment experiences. And so we have a pilot project with SARCOMAS. And I think it kind of stems from that doctors and patients are very using a lot of things, and it's often not captured. And so it's a way to systematically and harmonize the capture of those uses, and it can also be negative too, right? And that way doctors find, or the patients and the doctors can see what's not working and maybe try something else. So yeah, the idea is try to be a public resource and also potentially identify things that might be working to determine what then can work on further research or clinical trials.
And how can people get access to the data?
Yeah, and it's also, the main goal for it is to be free and open to the public. So it's just a website and mobile app. It's called Cure IDs. The idea is once, you can, and we expanded it to patients to 4 days too. So we all know doctors are busy sometimes. So patients can submit their treatment experiences, it gets reviewed, and then it's automatically, once it's approved, it's up on the website, and platforms for everybody to see.
So it's de-identified data and you can just go there and see what osteosarcoma data has been put in or what, and you can sort by disease, right?
Yep.
All right, well.
Can I
Thank, oh,
actually
good.
throw out one more question?
Okay,
I wanted
sure.
to circle back to Dr. Harn, your presentation. I like wrote down, I was like, okay, takeaway, need research biopsies and validative studies for clinical trials, for every clinical trial, which honestly, I would have thought by now, like that, like the correlative studies would be baked into every trial. Again, given that we know that it's not like one big disease, that it is, that they're all these like little subtypes, right? It's like critical to understand why it works for some patients, why not in others. So I guess what can patient advocates do to help with that, to kind of help with, you know, getting research biopsies included in clinical trials as well as.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly. You know, there's a lot of regulatory burden that can be overcome if a patient says, I want to send my information and my tissue to the Grohar lab to sequence it. That, you know, that's consent from the patient. So that solves a lot of challenges from a regulatory hurdle for sure. But how do we make it more available, more aware? And we had a really nice conversation about the challenges at initial diagnoses, and you know, you're reeling and someone comes in and says, look, we want, can you also do extra biopsies to send to my lab? Like, no. So I think, I do feel like we just need to like critically think with patient advocates and providers and surgeons especially, because you know, oftentimes we don't know about the patient in oncology until they've already seen Dr. Weiss. So yeah, it's a huge problem. It's a lot harder than one would think. You know, a kid's got a 8-centimeter Ewing's tumor, and yet there's in our bank we've got more brain tumors in the bank than sarcomas. So like it's because there's a lot of portals of entry. It's just an incredibly complicated problem.
And I think that reality, and you, Christina, you and I had this conversation about, as a parent, do you put your child through a research biopsy or not? And that's a really tough thing, you know, and you gave the example of your patient, you know, but I do think that that's something that, you know, needs to be continued to be really thought about, of how critical it is when you don't have that information, you get to the end of a trial, and now you don't have, these people have all been treated and you can't sort it out. And then it's, in a way, it's kind of, it's been a waste. And so, you know, it's really a tension that I think requires a lot more thought and discussion. I know I was asked at one point to write an article for a patient advocacy newsletter around this, of, you know, how to convince parents to do this. You haven't seen that yet, because I just really struggled with knowing how, you know, empathizing with what that's like to be the, you know, a parent of a child, and you don't want to put your child through something more. And yet, I mean, it's such an altruistic, like, step back up, and yet for some people, it's like a matter of, they want meaning to whatever they've gone through, and this adds, like, they can add something to our knowledge. But I think that how we help people, and I don't think there's one right answer, but at least get enough information so people can make informed decisions about it, that if you decide not to do it, no, you know, and that's okay, but then we do run that situation where we might not learn as much as we could to help not only your child or yourself, but then that next person tomorrow who's going to be diagnosed with this disease. So it makes it difficult. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
I wonder what you would think is, you know, it was said earlier, you said like the most important thing was having a peer. And I would think that this is an example too, right? Where it would be then a two-way street. Like, I know right now you feel like this, like I could never say that to a person because I haven't walked that road. But if I could connect them with somebody, or at least offer the opportunity to connect to somebody who's been down that road, maybe they can help them. Well, you know, the first thing you need to figure out is where the lunchroom is, because you're gonna be spending, you know, like things like that are really practical, but also, there's this whole thing about tissue. And that's one thing that I've thought, but I don't know how to make that happen.
That is actually a very good idea. And is that, like, as a mother, if I had small children downstairs, I actually don't think I would, to be honest. I don't think I would put them through it. Because I had a pinch I actually have soft tissue sarcoma. I don't have osteosarcoma. And I had a pinch biopsy, and it was excruciatingly painful afterwards. It actually caused more than the amputation did. probably because they gave me the good books after the invitation out. But I would never put a small child through that, but I have teenagers. I would explain to them how important it is and how it can help people coming after them, and I would let them make that decision themselves. But I wouldn't do it for a small child, but even though it is, I would do it myself. Going forward for research books, but I just wouldn't do it. I'd like it. And I don't know, that might be mean for other people who have that, who have children don't do that, but I just wouldn't because it is quite painful, and in my experience it was, so I definitely wouldn't.
I think it's, one of the things that comes up with, as you as researchers explaining the importance of it to the public. And if you look at what happened with organ donation, okay, there's a tangible outcome for it, sure, at the end of the day, because someone gets to live. But by giving that, giving the tangible outcome, because it's so far removed from someone with how we don't see what we're doing. I don't understand how a piece of hair can change, the course of 1,000 or 1,000 patients to come. But if you as researchers are explaining that, I'm going to give it a very big further thought as a parent or as a patient to do that. And I think that's something beholden is to look at that and look at how we made organ donation acceptable and almost a choice that you had to make, if that makes sense, in certain situations, that it's not even questioned whether you get to make the choice. It's not whether you are making the choice, you just get to make the choice. Yeah.
Would you think that would have to be an in-person back and forth, or could that be like, click on this and here's Dr. Gohar talking about, blah, blah, blah?
I think it's, I think it can be on, I think it can be
online.
no, it's not, we didn't have, it's an advocacy campaign, it's an education campaign, it's educating people why we need this.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
And the difference it's gonna make. Because
That's
if
right.
you can explain the difference, like a tangible difference on that effect, it's gonna change. It's the same reason people go into clinical trial.
I love that, and I just have this idea, because I do think, like, again, I'm just trying to think of things that like our community can do to help with this, and, one thing we could do is record videos of people that are, because I do think the challenge is like, in the moment, having just been diagnosed versus, again, being 3 years into it, and understand what the challenges are, but you could be that caregiver, 3 years out, with a message to the newly diagnosed patient saying, "I've been in your shoes. And I know, these are all the things that you're thinking about. This is why, a research biopsy is so important." And that could be like maybe a video that doctors that are consenting patients can just say, if you have a moment, like, here's just, like, we just want to have patient perspective on this. Because you're right, that might drive home a little bit, more than like all the formal consent, stuff.
You ready to heavily edit? Give me a camera and tell me to talk about.
Okay. Corey's got one. Well, thank you all for,
It's about precision medicine, they don't understand it, and people are fundamentally selfish and egotistical in that. So if I'm understanding that it could potentially make me better and me, and it's gonna make, it's looking at me as an individual.
makes a
that's what makes
difference.
it big.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference. Well, thank you all for really an engaging session. We really appreciate Dr. Weiss and Dr. Grohar. And the next up is 4 o'clock on the lobby level for the marketplace.